So I'd be delighted to hear comments or answer questions, and seeing this is being videotaped, we have a mic, so wait for the mic if you have a question or comment.
A little detail, I was interested in the size of your different sections of the computer science course, the Python course.
Yes, very good question. Well, our sections, you know, they typically run at about 60 to 70 in the first year courses. Individual sections, yeah. However, by the time, and that's because our incoming class is just under 200, and seeing, you know, they're divided into more than one. Well, actually 3 sections. We actually now have CS5 Green, which is CS5 with all of the applications being out of biology motivated. And CS42 usually runs around 40 students. So, but the interesting thing is that CS70, it really only used to be taken by CS majors, and there weren't that many of them. And so it would run between a dozen and 20 per year. Last semester, actually this semester, we have 120 students in CS70. And it's not just that we have so many majors and so many non-majors wanting to take it. It's that the students from the other Claremont colleges have discovered the importance of learning computer science, and so they are flooding into our institutions. So for a place that prides itself on small classes, it's a bit of an issue. And you know, one of the things is that it's very hard to respond instantly to the increase in demand, because you can't just take a physics professor or an engineering professor or a chemistry professor and say, oh, you're now a CS professor. So we have some issues about addressing that, but
Thanks. It's a great talk. Thank you. I had a question about, in talking with other deans and heads of universities, do you find them receptive to the changes you've made at Harvey Mudd, or like something they'd be interested in implementing at their own colleges and universities?
Great question. Thank you. It depends who you're talking to. One of the things that, so for example, Stanford is now actually really trying to address this, and it's something that I would say the dean cares about, the chair of the CS department cares about, and it's very interesting because they have managed to get virtually every student at Stanford to take a computer science class. But the problem is that many of the women don't take it till their senior year. And then they discover they love it because they've actually done a very good job with their intro course. So one of the things they're working on quite hard is to get more women to take the intro CS class early on. And they were about 10% female probably 3 years ago, and they're up to 17% in their graduating class this year, female. So that's progress. MIT has been working on it really seriously as well, and they're up at just over 30% female in the CS major. Carnegie Mellon, I mentioned, and they're about 30% in the CS major, and that's been a priority for them, one they've worked on significantly. On the other hand, you will see other institutions that are at 12% female and who, either because they're feeling really stressed. I mean, a lot of public universities are under a lot of budget pressure, and they're just feeling it's very hard to do things about this. So I would say it's mixed, but one of the things I'm very excited about, so the person who really, to a large extent, championed what happened at Mudd, it wasn't me, it was our computer science faculty, but was a young computer science faculty member, Christine Alvarado, who arrived 1 year before I arrived. And Christine had done her undergraduate at Dartmouth, had a very supportive environment, and then went to do her PhD at MIT in the area of artificial intelligence. And there are some areas of computer science at MIT that are known to be somewhat hostile. and to women, and she had several students and faculty say to her, "You only got in because you were female." Now, I mean, Christine is spectacular. She won a career award from NSF in her second year at Harvey Mudd College. I mean, so just spectacular in all respects. She's going to be a college president, I have no doubt. And she wants to be eventually, even. But she arrived and she saw this. I mean, her experience at MIT really bothered her, and it was the first time she really felt she really suffered from the imposter syndrome, because it's very hard when people are saying to your face, "You don't belong here, you're not good enough." And so she, when she saw the situation at Mudd with 10% of the CS majors being female, she decided to do something about it. So she was the catalyst. Several other faculty members worked with her on changing the intro class, but she was the person who, started talking about taking female students to Hopper. She took 12 in 2006. Last year, we took 51, plus another 8 more senior female students as mentors, plus 3 faculty to Hopper. I mean, we're this tiny college, and we had the largest academic presence at Hopper for the last 2 years. I'm sure we will again this year in Minneapolis. So the reason I was telling you about Christine, apart from the fact that I should tell you about Christine, is she just left us for UCSD, the University of California, San Diego. And she left us because her husband, Alex, has a faculty position there. They were living sort of in between. She had her second child 6 months ago, and it was just having 2 kids. It was just too hard to do this commute, and UCSD made her an offer, and we would have gladly made Alex an offer, but Alex is really into research and needs PhD students, and we just couldn't persuade him to move. So we lost Christine, which is awful, but it's also sort of wonderful, because she's going to transform the program at UCSD. And, I think my experience is that every single institution that wants to increase the participation of women, whether it's in engineering or in physics or in computer science, they've been successful. It doesn't happen overnight. If you stop paying attention to it, it goes away. I mean, similarly, I'll just say for institutions who want to increase the participation of African Americans and Native Americans and Hispanic students, if you persist, eventually you make progress. So I just want to talk very briefly about African American students at Mudd. This has been one of my biggest frustrations, because we have worked really hard on it, and we had been running for a number of years in our incoming class, 196 students, 2 African American students. Then this last year, we got up to 4. And I just got the data from it's not quite complete yet, but we have at least 9 African American or partially African American students in our incoming class this year, which is an all-time high for the college. And we have 22 Hispanic students, which is like last year we had 13. So it's one of these things. Persistence. So my experience is that, yes, not every university is as passionate about it as we are. And I will say it takes everyone. I mean, why did the number of underrepresented groups in our incoming class go up this year? A group of roughly 15 of our faculty decided that they would contact every single student who identified as not white or Asian and either phone them or email them and personally encourage them to come. And it has close to doubled the number of those students who are showing up in our incoming class. So.
You mentioned how difficult it can be for women in graduate school. I was at Duke for graduate school when Nan Cohen started the Women's Initiative, and it was striking the drop-off in confidence for both men and women soon after they entered graduate school. But it was interesting that that drop in confidence was so much greater for women. And then that the confidence levels would rise again as they neared graduation. but it didn't rise as quickly for women, and it never quite reached that confidence level they had when they came in. And this is an issue. Obviously, if people aren't feeling confident, so many are feeling that imposter syndrome, they're not as willing to take the next step in academics. They're more likely to leave. Do you have ideas for how to improve the situation for graduate school?
Well, the first thing I want to mention is there's a book that Sheryl Sandberg published recently called Lean In. And it's, you know, I want to confess bias. Not only am I a friend of Cheryl's and proud to count her as a friend, but she has been extraordinarily, she's resulted in us getting a lot of attention about what we have done at Harvey Mudd College, because she's a much more visible person than anyone at Harvey Mudd is. So the first thing I want to do is I really recommend that book in terms of how important it is for us to encourage everyone, but especially underrepresented groups, to be ambitious about their career. And I think one of the most important things is to create networks of groups that support, of people that support each other. And, you know, I will tell you that, I mean, one of the things I do is I mentor all kinds of people by phone. Like, I have no idea how many people I mentor a year, but, you know, there's probably about 50 people in the world who will send me emails occasionally and say, do you have time to do a phone call? I need some advice. And it's everything from high school students through some of the most senior people in the field. And I do it for all kinds of reasons. One is I learn a tremendous amount from it. But the other reason I do it is because I've been very fortunate to have people do that for me in my life. But the biggest reason I do it is what I'm expecting is the vast majority of those people will do it for others. And, you know, I think this whole issue about confidence, I don't know how many times I've doubted I can do something and have had somebody who's close to me say, no, you can do that. You really can do that. Or, you know, you're doing such an awesome job at something or other. I mean, I will tell you, it's really funny. When you're president of an institution, mostly you hear criticism. I think it's true for CEOs, too. But, I mean, it's just true that, you know, that's mostly what you hear because you're the person responsible for every single thing that goes wrong. And you're responsible for every single thing that goes wrong. So it's not surprising that that's what happens. But I think having a network of people whom you can reach out to and whom you will support yourself, I think really goes a long way. And it's one of the things that Sheryl talks about in her book. So, you know, I have a number of my undergraduate students from both the University of British Columbia and from Princeton and now from Harvey Mudd College who go to graduate school. And I will get, you know, emails saying, can I do a phone call? I'm about to give my first paper at a conference, or I'm worried that I have to write my first grant and I don't think I'm going to do it well, or, you know, I'm looking for my first job with my spouse and we have to negotiate these things together. And, you know, I think it's really helpful having those kinds of networks of people in your life. And the only way you get them is by, you know, I mean, one of the things Sheryl says that I don't entirely agree with is that, you know, you should never walk up to a stranger and ask them to be your mentor. Well, people actually do it to me all the time. And I pretty much always say yes. Now, I have an ulterior motive for saying yes, and that's that I love to paint. And I do most of this stuff on the phone on the weekend while I'm painting. And it allows me to feel really good about my painting because I'm doing something valuable in the world while I'm painting. And I'm beginning to believe that my painting is valuable in its own right, but it took me a long time to get there. And so, you know, like doing these phone calls, I love talking to people while I paint, so it works out really well. So I think putting in place ways for students to learn to support each other. I mean, one of the things we did at Princeton was we started doing a lot of graduate student, undergraduate joint activities because it turns out the undergraduates had so much more confidence ridiculously than the graduate students. But I mean, it was just part of the Princeton culture that the undergraduates think that they're incredibly smart, and then the graduate students feel quite challenged in their confidence levels. But mixing them together was actually really good for both groups. So, you need to look at each particular institution. UBC has a tri-mentoring program where they partner alumni, graduate students, and undergraduate students together. And this whole idea of ladder mentoring is very, works really well as well. I should also mention we did something called WITS On, Women in Tech Share Online, in the fall semester, and had roughly a few thousand undergraduate women in science and engineering and several hundred, 600 mentors, everyone from graduate school through very senior positions in an online sort of forum. And I think actually the graduate students probably got the most out of it, because even though they're officially there as mentors, there are all these other people who were a little bit ahead of them or a lot ahead of them, and it ended up being a very interesting conversation. So providing those kinds of venues where people can share information, share stories in particular, is really useful.
Thanks so much for your talk. I'm from World Learning, and we're trying to establish STEM model schools in Egypt, and we're having problems with the pipeline. A little bit about what you were talking about with underrepresented groups not being either having access or the opportunity to come into STEM fields. Can you talk a little bit about what Mudd has done to either the faculty or the students to reach out to those underrepresented groups, either at the high school or the middle school level?
Great. So we've done a bunch of things. One of them is our admissions folks have organized something called the FAST program, which is Future Achievers in Science and Technology. And we fly out, we do 2 of them in the fall and 1 of them in the spring. In the fall, we fly out people who would be admissible to Mudd, so they have the kinds of academic records that we could admit them. And we bring them out for a couple of days. All expenses paid. We have them, they room with current students, they attend classes, they learn about financial aid and those kinds of things. That's been really helpful in terms of just getting the Mudd experience on their horizon, because we're just not well enough known in many parts of the country. In the spring we do one, but that one, so that we bring seniors in the fall. In the spring, we do one for juniors, and that one we do for the local, Southern California region. And it's much more, we don't, try to filter for students who would be admitted to Mudd. I mean, the GPA and SATs are equivalent to Caltech or MIT, so they're extremely high in terms of admission. But we do it for everyone in the surrounding area. We also do an annual West conference, which is women engineers, scientists, and technologists. And it's run by our female students, and we bring roughly between 250 and 300 female students, roughly 10th and 11th grade, and do a lot of hands-on activities with them. We have an Upward Bound program that's been at Mudd for, I think it's 42 years, something like that. And it's, we typically get 1 or 2 students from Upward Bound who apply to Mudd and come to Mudd each year. But it's, again, it's a program that I think is really helpful. They're all students from low-income neighborhoods and low-income homes. They're virtually all students of color, and we're really helping them. It's a year-long program with an intensive summer program as well, and I think they have something like 96% of their students are going on to 4-year colleges, and they're pretty much all from homes where nobody's ever gone to college. So I think it's part of really reaching out and moving that group. We tried doing a math camp for African-American boys for a couple of years. It turned out not to work well because it turned out that the way the kids were selected, which we weren't in charge of, we ended up with a lot of African-American boys who didn't like math and had severe behavior problems. So we hope to restart that one, but use a different selection process. There's obviously a long story behind that one. We're looking at doing an engineering girls camp for probably girls at the end of 9th grade and girls of color, and we've got a proposal in. We hope we'll be funded for that. We'll probably start not this summer, but the next one after that. We are doing 2 high school AP courses as MOOCs, massive open online courses. There'll be one for physics, AP Physics C, which is mechanics with calculus, and one for principles of computer science, we hope. I mean, it will definitely be a CS course. The problem is the principles of computer science isn't entirely defined yet. It's not actually, the exam is not offered yet, but we're going to have the people who are doing the presentations be largely our students, and we'll be able to have students of color and females and all kinds of things, so that we'll be showcasing a much more diverse, but also a younger group of people who should be good role models for the students who see them. We hope to actually teach the CS class in a school where that is almost all students of color, and be able to, I mean, this will depend on getting permission from their parents, of course, but be able to film some of those students so that, again, we have role models for underrepresented groups where they can see students of their own age. We do Science Bus, which is a science, something that our students take a bus out with all kinds of hands-on science things into the surrounding neighborhoods, schools. We do Homework Hotline. We actually do a lot for such a tiny place, which is a free tutoring by phone to students in the surrounding schools for math and science homework from 4th through 12th grade. And we have roughly about 40 of our students, mostly first years, doing that, which we think is really good for them because it sort of gives them a sense of value that they can help somebody else when they're going through all this challenge. And we do the professional development of Math for America in Los Angeles, which is by we, it's really Daryl Young, for those of you who know Daryl, an amazing math professor and also Mudd alum. That's putting really excellent math teachers in a number of the schools, in particular in LAUSD, and of course most of the students in most of those schools are students of color. And so yeah, I probably missed some things, but our whole idea is we work very hard to try and be this amazing science and engineering and math education that also has a very substantial component of humanities, social sciences, and the arts, that has this very big focus on collaboration, on helping each other. There's no competition for grades. And we really try to have our students focus on how they can make the world a better place, how they can use this amazing education they get to really make a difference. And I think that sort of shows up in the kinds of things, not just that our students do, but our faculty try to do to really, move science and engineering and math education forward in the world. We have somebody there.
Sorry.
I'd argue that the largest unrepresented group is STEM applicants nationally. And a lot of it goes back to your comments about gatekeepers, particularly among engineers. I think you'll find a lot of engineer applicants come from people who had one in the family, an uncle, cousin, or maybe a high school teacher was an engineer, which is hard to find nowadays. There's been several bills before Congress that have both, I think twice they've been there and defeated, where they've encouraged or would require universities to publish average salaries within 12 months of graduation, 24 months of graduation by degree, and percentage of employment within 12 months after graduation. The kind of information you get from an uncle or a father who's an engineer or whatever that you can't if you're an underprivileged kid or with nobody like that in high school as a counselor. Why do you think the academic community is very much against these two bills? Why they don't want to pit literature against engineering, but I would think that's the kind of facts that you need for so some kid in Southeast DC high school has nobody in the family, nobody in the faculty that could advise, and an elite school like yours wouldn't be reaching out to them, and you're a small part of the university. Don't you think a bill like that would actually help with recruitment for STEM nationally, and then through that, underprivileged folks?
So first of all, I'm probably the wrong person to ask this question, because I do think a bill like that would probably help underprivileged students get a sense of what they ought to do. Now, the reason I'm not the right person is because even though I'm now an American citizen, I grew up in Canada and spent much of my life in Canada. In Canada, we actually believe that should be a strong correlation between what happens in university and what you end up doing with your life afterwards. And so, for example, we have virtually every university has co-op programs where you can take 5 years and graduate instead of with a debt, with actually a bank account, because you're going to work 20 months out of those 5 years, and you're going to work in areas related to what you're actually studying. And I was sort of stunned when I came to Princeton, and our first year, our student engineering society had done a survey of the first year engineering students, and they had asked them why they had picked engineering to major in, and something like 70 or 80% said that it was because they wanted a good career afterwards. And when I showed this to the president and the provost and the dean of the faculty and a few other people, they were horrified. It was sort of like, don't you feel awful, Maria, that they're studying engineering because they want to work as an engineer? I'm going like, no. So there is this belief in the United States that it's somehow wrong to want an education for it to help you with your career after that. And I do think that that is one of the misalignments with a number of underrepresented groups, because we know from research that if you want to persuade some of particularly African Americans and Hispanic students in high school that they really need a university education, the most effective thing to persuade them and their parents is to show that it will lead to a successful career. So, I can understand why many institutions, I do think that publishing that data will cause changes in choices of major, and I think that there are a lot of universities that would be very upset about that.
We have time for maybe one more question. Henry,
Thanks. You focused your efforts on one department, computer sciences. Just very briefly, what effect has that had on other departments, and have they adapted similar types of, so we say, competitive changing courses to attract students?
Great question, and I guess the first thing I should say is that at the time that this effort started, and I'll say it's not my focus, it was that the computer science department happened to do it, and partly because I'm a computer scientist, partly because I have worked on this at other institutions when I was the chair of computer science or whatever. I've gotten way too much credit for it. But the first thing I should say is that the time when the computer science department started this, a third of the students at Mudd were female, and they were really by far the most underrepresented for females. So for instance, about 30% of the engineering majors were female. Physics was about 22%. Math was probably, more like 35%. Chemistry and biology were probably close to 50%. There was one clear department that was really out of line with everybody else. As the numbers have gone up for the college as a whole, I would say that we're seeing, if you look at math, computer science, engineering, biology, and chemistry, you see good numbers of women in all of them. So, you're not, The one department that I would say is still somewhat underrepresented is probably physics, which is maybe 25% female. They're still probably higher than the nation, which is more like 20% female. But I am noticing so that they suddenly have a big increase in the number of physics majors, and in the sophomore years when they pick, and I'm noticing that there's a good number of women in those physics majors, and they have changed who's teaching the intro courses, and I think there is some of that going on. So I suspect that physics is going to be right where everybody else is very soon.